Do you actually have to be on cocaine to be on this podcast?
It's a great day to be a Wildcat!
Cocaine.
Durfing.
What is up, everybody? You are listening to yet another edition of Cocaine Willie, the official K-State representative on the College Huddle. I'm your commissioner, Bob Trollsby, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Fireball Matt Marchesini. The good chef is out of commission. He's not feeling well. I wonder how much of that is legit and how much of that is him. He's down in the dumps about our K-State Wildcats. But tonight we are joined by the Arizona Wildcats affiliate for the College Huddle and now recurring guests, Wildcat Radio 2.0. We're joined by Adam Green and Brett Berry from Wildcat Radio 2.0. Brett and Adam, how are y'all doing tonight?
I imagine better than you guys are in terms of the way the season has started. I think Arizona's competition maybe not quite as stiff as what Kansas State has played, but you know, I didn't know how we do things. Like my title here on the video side is just so damn long. Like it's like Adam Green, the Adam Green Wildcat, and then there's just Brett.
It's a lot of
I need to change that. Like that doesn't. I'm not that guy. You know.
Like, the funny thing is, Adam technically is a writer, so I think he just goes downhill to writing his. He gets paid by the word, clearly, even
by the letter.
Yeah. By the character.
Happy to be here, guys.
Yeah.
I feel like, for Arizona fans, this is a game that's been circled on the calendar since like last season ended. Is like, okay, Hawaii, Weber State, you should win those games. Kansas State's going to be the test. And then, of course, now Kansas State not as highly ranked as they were to begin the season and maybe not highly thought of. But for Arizona's side, I think Brett can attest to this. It's still a very, very big game.
Yeah, no, it's nice to be back with you guys. Excited for this game. We've had this circled since the schedule got released as a, nobody knows what this Arizona Wildcats team will be as we head into this additional scratching post trophy matchup. And I think Arizona fans have liked what they've seen so far, but even with K-State's struggles, it's, Arizona fans remember last year I don't know. It feels like K-State might be on the Arizona path from last year, going from ranked to, very much not ranked. But it might be a race between you guys and ASU if they keep looking poor as well.
Yeah, it may be a race between us and Florida State from 2024 at this rate. So we'll see how that goes. But before we get into the episode, this beer crack is brought to you by Auntie Mae's Parlor, located at 616 North 12th Street in the heart of Aggieville in Manhattan, Kansas. Auntie Mae's has been in business for 51 years and is an absolute must-visit destination in Aggieville on game days, school nights, and anything else, any other nights that aren't game days or school nights. Auntie Mae's is my favorite destination in Aggieville. I think Matt, one of Matt's favorites, if not Matt's favorite, as well. So if we got any Arizona fans who went last year to the game in Manhattan, hopefully you were able to check out Auntie Mae's. And if you weren't, check them out the next time you play in Manhattan. But they feature a wide variety of craft cocktails, draft beers, and everything in between, including events like live music, comedy, and all sorts of other events. We've got Trivia Smackdown Wednesday, September 10th, tomorrow night, as we're recording this on Tuesday the 9th. We've got Nathan Page's Underground Guitar Poll on Thursday, September 11th. And then we've got House Party with Papa Dom on Thursday, September 18th, next week at the Parlor. So again, check out their website, www.auntiemays.com, to get a list of their upcoming events, and visit your auntie in MHK at 616 North 12th Street. Be sure to tell them Cocaine Willie sent you if you stop by. All right, Arizona preview, big picture. I want to talk about this Arizona team because last year, obviously a 4-8 season, just not quite reaching the expectations that were set on Noah Fifita. Obviously, you have the coaching staff change, a tremendous amount of turnover, coaching staff-wise, with Jed Fish going up north to UW. And you started off with a dominant 2-0 start so far with the reboot of Brent Brennan, I guess 2.0 in season 2.0. While K-State is out there searching for its identity, searching for toughness, searching for consistency after a 1-2 stumble. Both programs, though, in this game face what could be a season-defining moment. How would you describe this Arizona team's identity 2 games into Brent Brennan's second year? And how does that compare to the expectations that came off of last season with that 4-8 finish?
Yeah, so I'll start at the end there. The expectations after last season were quite low. You talked about there was a lot of changeover before last season. The funny thing is, I think most people that aren't, the diehards and like our listeners and our fans don't realize that the roster is probably more turned over this season than it was last year when they went from 10 wins to 4, which, I think people see the guys in, Tyler Loop in the NFL, T-Mac in the NFL, obvious Arizona all-time great Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt played the one game against, was it New Mexico or NAU? I think it was New Mexico.
New Mexico, yeah. He was great.
We're going to count him as an Arizona draft pick for that one game. So it's an interesting time because obviously last season was, disastrous to say the least. The new coaching staff, and there were both good hires and bad hires, I would say, on the coaching staff, and that's some of the biggest keys that have changed things so far. Expectations were relatively low but cautiously optimistic, especially with new offensive coordinator Seth Doege. A bright young guy where even on the message boards here, people are already saying, well, he's going to be a head coach next year and we're going to lose him. And it's like, as I always,
people are really saying that.
They sure are. Have you met Arizona boards or any message board anywhere? And I will just say what me and Adam always say on the podcast. If people are trying to hire your coaches, you've already done well. Right. So if you're a program like Arizona, that's what that's a sign of success. There's a little less, I think, optimism with Danny Gonzalez among the broader fan base. I think Adam and I were more optimistic with him as defensive coordinator. And so far, I almost think the defense has probably looked better than the offense. In the first 2 games, and I'll let you go for a second, Adam. I know I'm apparently getting paid by the word on this now rather than the character. I think Arizona fans saw what they were cautiously optimistic and hoping to see in the first 2 games, but they're also so trained by being Arizona fans to not think that they can have a good thing for very long. And so I don't think there's a lot of hubris yet in the fan base or in the program.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I think last season there was a lot of excitement over, just like there was disappointment that Fish left, but there was excitement over who stayed. You had T-Mac, you had Big Jonah, you had Fifita, you had so many guys stick around where we all kind of lost sight of what the team had lost, and not just from the portal, but to the draft, like Jacob Cowing, Michael Wiley, guys who were, Tanner McLaughlin, guys who were just key players on that offense the year before. Never mind the coaching change, just those were some of your best players, and they were gone. And what we saw was a team that offensively, especially, the game planning wasn't very good. They went all offseason saying they're not going to change everything. Why would you? You have all these guys, stick with what works. And then they changed everything, made it worse. And you had a coaching staff that did not have a deep roster, like the starting 12 or starting 11 on each side, pretty good, but what was behind them, especially once injuries started to hit, wasn't very good. And that was probably attributed to the coaching change. Just a lot of the depth was gone. And then you had a coaching staff that wasn't good enough to maximize what they had. So they had a staff that was getting the least out of the most, and then the most became the least over the course of the season. Now, in game 3, that wasn't necessarily the case yet. I think there were some players who got hurt in that game. I forget who they were. But this thing started to crumble a little bit now. Arizona went on the next week, beat Utah, and then the wheels fell off. But you go into this season, at the end of last season, a lot of people wanted Brent Brennan fired. And I wasn't necessarily I don't think Brett and I were on the, you must fire him, but we were on the, well, if you do fire him, we understand. Because that was just horrible. But what they kept him, and they had an offseason, they remade their roster. They got like 61 new players on this roster from last season, to Brett's point about how much the roster has changed. Over 61 new players, and a lot of those guys are from FCS schools, leveling up. Some are transfers from other programs, like Chris Hudson, who got his first game action last week against Weber State, played out of Washington State, played for Oregon at one point, I believe. So it's a mix of guys like that, but it's an entirely new roster with some holdovers, with Noah Fifita still there, with Chris Hunter, Dalton Johnson, some guys on defense. So going into this season, it's like, okay, I guess you have to give Brent Brennan a chance. He's still the coach. And if you're an Arizona fan, you want him to succeed. And then you have a lot of players who, there's some guys you remember from last season, but the guys that you remember from last season are the guys who played well the year before. So you should feel okay, there's some talent there. What do these new guys have to offer? When you have 61 new guys, you don't need all of them to hit. But if a handful of them do, you could be competitive. And then you add a coaching staff to Seth Daggy, Danny Gonzalez, Craig Nivar, the special teams coordinator now, who they didn't have a special teams coordinator last season. Okay, if this coaching staff is good enough to maximize the talent they do have and can scheme around the deficiencies, unlike last year's, why can't they be a little better? Now, I think I predicted Brent and I were I think I have them for 6 wins this year. So I'm looking at this thing, they're going to be amazing. But I think we all expect more competitive football this season. And it's said that makes you excited, just being competitive, but that's what happened to Arizona last season where they weren't. So, 2 games in, not the best opponents, but they did what a good team should do to those opponents.
And that brings me to my second question. And going into this season, you would have thought K-State would have probably been 2-1 at the worst going into this game. From the outsider's perspective, I'm curious how the two of you are looking at this as Big 12 fans and fans of another team that has to compete against K-State. What is your perception of K-State's trajectory right now? Do you see a team that's slipping, or do you just see one that's battling through a schedule that, includes a game in Dublin and a game against I'm not even going to say a good FCS squad, but an FCS squad, and then finally rounding it out with a service academy playing all triple option?
I mean, your question used up less time than you had in time of possession in the second half against Army, I'm pretty sure. I would say, I would give a pass for the Dublin game almost to either team. The outcome of, both teams kind of looked sloppy in that game, right? To say the least, especially to start the game. It was real ugly, and part of that's weather, part of it's travel. Okay. It's, it kind of reminds me a bit of Arizona last year where, even when they won their first 2 games, against inferior opponents, they didn't look great doing it. And that's kind of, if not a red flag, certainly a yellow flag. Army is not the worst FCS school, but how they got beat by Army, I think gives me a little more concern on your guys' behalf. But there's still talent on the K-State roster. So I think it's, that's where I kind of feel like I'm looking back at us a year ago and wondering, hey, we still have all this talent here. Why are we not doing better? And that's kind of the funny thing, I think, of college football and Big 12 football, maybe more than most, because I don't think there's quite as many just absolute NFL superstars as there are in the top 2 conferences. It's really more about, instead of the top 5 guys that are going to get drafted, it's about the top 50 guys on the roster. They're going to see snaps every game and how they play together. And to Adam's point of, last year Arizona was less than the sum of their parts, and now so far this year they feel like more than the sum of their parts, like a good football team can be, even if it lacks some star power. And my concern for you guys is maybe you're less than the sum of your parts, kind of like we were last year.
And you guys could probably answer even better than we can about Kansas State. Like, I see a team that lost a couple of close games, and they should have beat Army. They should be better than Army. The Iowa State game, for all that went into it, they could have won that game. It was close. They had a chance. So it's like, is this a bad team that they lost 2 games by a combined 6 points? Because last year, Arizona, when they were losing bad. They were losing by 3 scores, 4 scores. So, I see a team that I remember last season was pretty good, that just worked Arizona. I think Arizona had scored on their opening drive. All right, this is the offense we've been looking for. And then we got the offense that we're going to get the rest of the season. Yeah, it went downhill from that opening drive against Kansas State. But how different is this Kansas State team? Because Arizona, 61 new players, they got to be different than last year. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be better than last year, but they're going to be something different, right? They almost have to be, just by the math alone and the roster turnover alone. I know Gunnar Maldonado. He's over with you guys now. So it's I don't know much about Kansas State's roster to say, okay, they should fall off from what they were last year so dramatically. Maybe you guys can answer that more, because they're 2 close losses, one of them to one of the top teams in the country, if not, certainly in the conference. That's not something to be ashamed of. So it's do you look at this and say those losses are portending something to come? This is a problem within the roster, or is it just tough early schedule, couple of close games that went the wrong way, moving on? That's what I want to know, because I don't think Kansas State just fell off a cliff like that.
No, I think I hopefully we're not trending towards the former, right? You look at the Iowa State. I think Iowa State's an exceptional team. I think they've showed that in the first 3 games of the year that they are going to be challenging for a Big 12 title, and they're going to be in the running for a college football playoff berth. So you can kind of take that loss and maybe not. I don't know if sweeping it under the rug is a good way to put it, but you can deal with that a little bit better than what I would say for last week's game. And then the week before against North Dakota, this is a team that quite frankly could be 0-3. You have this FCS team that, yes, you don't know too much about, but you have to put together a 2-minute drive, a 2-minute drill to win the game against North Dakota in technically week 1. So it is kind of all these parts that the sum from what we're seeing, as fans of K-State, is the sum does not look great right now. You have a lot of position groups that I feel like are a little bit disheveled, which you would expect maybe early on in the season. So this game, I think, is a really key one because, one, it's your first road game, which last season, we went on the road to Tulane for our first game, and we're very lucky to kind of eke one out early on in the season. But Arizona looks much improved. I can definitely say that for sure, despite maybe the competition, but they look like they have it together, which is definitely something that we can't say right now as a team that is together, especially looking at it on the defensive side. Offensively, we see a lot of really good flashes, but then there's some mistakes that really kill you. So Friday night will be very interesting to see if it is, the former of this just isn't a very good football team, or maybe the latter of, well, they played 2 teams, you played Iowa State, who's probably, in the running to win the conference, and you played Army, who's a very tough team to kind of figure out how to defend. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see. I think a lot of us just have no idea at this point, which is very, very sad.
Yeah, there's kind of been a toughness deficiency with this team from what we've seen through the first 3 games. It's just, it's really baffling, and I don't really have a ton of ways to diagnose what the issue is, but they kind of look like a mid 2000s, late 20 or mid 2010s to late 2010s like Texas team under Charlie Strong or Tom Herman, where you've got good talent. The talent's there. The stars are there as far as the blue chip recruits and everything, but they can't put it together on the field. And it doesn't seem to be like there's those vocal leaders in the locker room that are, they have that edge, and they're kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, being an asshole in the locker room and getting people to be accountable. Matt and I were in a fraternity where we had this sergeant at arms who was supposed to be kind of the asshole, and they need someone like that in the locker room, and they don't really seem to have that right now. So that's kind of my broad strokes assessment. But
like, as an Arizona guy, that scares me. Like all the Arizona coaches is going to talk about like how like Kansas State's going to come in and give it their best shot. Right? It's almost like the season's on the line. It's not a conference game still. Like next year, next time they play, it'll be a conference game.
Yeah, finally.
But it's like the team that's talented and just hasn't figured it out is the one that worries me more than the team that just doesn't have the talent. Because like, why can't Kansas State figure it out this week? Like they're playing a team that they beat 31-7 last season, going on a true road game. Maybe that galvanizes a roster, being on the road. So like that worries me as an Arizona guy that, Avery Johnson's still Avery Johnson. He can still be an electric player out there, someone who's tough to game plan for. So it's like, if you're saying, this team, they lost too much from last year. They lost, 16 starters, and they're relying on freshmen, and just it's not a good roster. Like, okay, good. I like to hear that going into this game. But what you just said, I don't like to hear, because like they could figure it out. They do have some veterans that have been there before. So like, and I just picture them figuring it out on Friday.
Can you tell Arizona fans are scarred by football games past?
Oh, Dylan Edwards is going to be healthy. Hey. He's going to have like, he's going to be 110%. Avery Johnson's going to be amazing. Like, yeah, this is what happens. Like, but I could see that, right? And I imagine like you guys are scarred right now because of the start to the season, juxtaposed with what you were expecting this season to be like. But if you just remove those expectations, okay, how have they played through the first 3 games? You might be able to lend yourself to, the 2 losses aren't, it's not a great performance either way for the 3 games, but the second game, maybe there's a hangover from the first game, and the first and third games were tough opponents that you lost close games. Why can't they just settle into the season, go on the road, playing with their backs against the wall, so to speak, and play well? Like ignore the expectations. Like, forget what you thought they'd be. Just look at who they are right now. It's probably not a bad football team, I would think.
Yeah, preach to all of K-State fans, because it's
I'm here for your therapy, apparently.
Yeah, it's been a tough week, but I want to get into a little bit from the offensive perspective. So Brent Brennan made some staff changes in the offseason. You brought in Seth Dagey, which for a lot of our listeners, who have watched Big 12 football in the past, Seth Dagey, quarterback extraordinaire, Texas Tech. He had some great seasons at Texas Tech, leading the Red Raiders. But the offense, from what it looks like from our perspective, looks more sharp, more efficient. Noah Fifita really looks like, kind of the Noah Fifita almost of a couple years ago, with some, decision making and putting some really good passes, into his receivers' hands. As we've talked about before, the competition level, may be considered a little bit modest, but how has Seth Dagey's arrival as offensive coordinator, kind of changed the offensive approach that Arizona has, and maybe what trends have you seen compared to last year that Coach Dagey has kind of put out there so far?
Yeah, you say like more sharp than last season. Like last season, they were a sphere. If you want like a perfectly smooth, just round sphere, like they weren't good. Like they came out of the gates. The first game against New Mexico was Fifita to T-Mac. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. If this is going to be the offense, it's like, no, eventually teams are going to start covering T-Mac, defending him just slightly better. And then the NAU game, it all fell apart. 7 points against Kansas State. Like Arizona's offense was terrible last year, so they had to make a change. And Dagey comes in, and I think we were all kind of curious what it would look like. It's like, okay, the spread kind of background, but is that Marshall? They ran the ball really well. Like, what would Arizona look like? And all offseason, we heard, kind of a varied offense, but he's not just an air it out type of guy, air raid kind of guy. He does like to run the ball. And it's like, okay, also wants to just work with the talent he has. And Arizona upgrade their receiver room, the depth anyway. Their running back room, more depth. Offensive line, let's see what they could do. So far, the first game, it was all about the running game. Like Noah was not sharp in the first game against Hawaii. Didn't make any tragic mistakes. He had a couple balls that probably could have been intercepted. None of them were. Did run in a touchdown. Did throw one to Sam Olsen, Brett's favorite player on Arizona's roster. But he also missed some throws in that game. You're like, okay, going into game 2 against Weber State, which not a very good opponent. We knew that. But it was like, okay, I think we all kind of expected the passing game to take precedent. Not that you shouldn't be able to run the ball against Weber State, but it's like, okay, you need to get Noah Fifita going. You need to have him look good. And he looked great. It looked like they had the concerted effort to say, okay, it's going to be a passing game. Let's get Noah some numbers. Let's get him comfortable. His footwork looked a lot better. Some of that pass, I think he threw one to Nunu Whatley to start the game, where it reminded me of when he threw to Jacob Cowing in the Alamo Bowl. Just nice little post pattern, just dropped it right in the back of the end zone, perfect ball. And it's kind of a reminder that this is what Noah Fifita can be. Now, again, can you do that against Kansas State? Can you do it against Big 12 competition? We have yet to see that, but it was a nice refresher, a nice reminder of what Arizona's offense could look like if things are working well for them. And I think Dagey, the idea is it's a varied offense. They're just going to use the skill they have. If they can run the ball, they're going to run the ball. If they need to throw, then hopefully they have the weapons to throw. But, 2 games in, hasn't been the same game plan either game. But I don't know if you'd expect to see the big offensive explosion or to see the whole playbook opened up. You get kind of at the bar menu, as people like to say, for Hawaii and Weber State. I would imagine we're going to see a little bit more against Kansas State on Friday.
Yeah, you gotta remember, Arizona fans from last season, Adam talked about, we don't know what this offense could be. Last year, we didn't know what it should be because nobody knew what the hell Dino Babers' offense, if it was being executed well, was supposed to look like. Like, nobody knows what he was trying to achieve. It was slow, it was plodding, and then Noah Fifita would just say, well, I'm going to chuck it deep to triple covered T-Mac and throw an interception in the end zone for 3 straight games. I think the another thing that, like, an outsider's perspective might not realize that, yeah, Arizona lost T-Mac, obviously, the best receiver in Arizona history, most talented. Their room in the receiver room might be better, though, and it's pretty darn deep. One of those guys is a former K-State guy from the state of Arizona, Trey Spivey. He's had a couple nice catches already so far, but they go a legitimate 6 deep and maybe even pretty close to 8 deep if they so choose. I think Adam, keep me honest. I think last week against Weber State, granted they rotated a lot of guys. There was 12 different guys with catches.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Which even in a blowout game, that's still mildly impressive. The one I think they would like to be doing a bit more with the tight end position, but their number one tight end got hurt and is out for the season after one play. And the guy that transferred back, Keon Burnett, very athletic, very talented, has struggled to stay healthy, and that has stayed true this season. If he's back and healthy, that might be an interesting wrinkle. They also have an interesting trio of running backs that all kind of offer different strengths. The biggest concern on the offensive side is really just can the O-line hold up? Rhino Tapatotai just came back from injury, major injury. Adam's impressed by the fact that I pronounced his name mostly correctly.
Yeah, it sounded right to me.
Well done. Well done.
Adam would just call him Big Rhino.
Yeah.
He looked. Let's be honest. He looked kind of rough in his first game back. He only played a little bit in the first half, but first game back, maybe getting your feet wet. There's been some shuffling around on the O line where I think it's been. I don't know if it's to say it's been good, but that was the big concern all off season, and that the general gist was if they can just be average, we think this Arizona offense can be pretty good collectively. There's a couple position groups that have some weak spots. Kayana DeCambra, first time as a center, has looked pretty darn good so far. Michael Wooten, former 4-star, failed right tackle, has been a revelation almost at left guard. There's things kind of coming together, but it's not feeling fully settled, if that makes sense.
But I think the overall point for Arizona's offense is we don't know what it's going to look like when it's fully functioning. Ideally, what's their identity offensively? Hopefully it's just moving the ball up and down the field and scoring points. I don't think they look at themselves as an air raid type of offense. It's going to spread it out and just throw the ball up and down the field, 45 passes a game, nor are they a power running team that's going to wear you down over the course of 60 minutes. They're a team ideally that has really good skill position talent. And if the offensive line, like Brett said, is good enough to give Noah Fifita time to open up some holes for the running backs, who I don't know if Kendrick Rosano is going to play this week. He was held out. He missed last week. But what does a Seth Doege offense look like at Arizona when it's functioning on all levels or at a high level? We don't know what that looks like yet, but hopefully we haven't seen it. Ideally we'd say, Arizona, the first game against Hawaii, they were lacking in the passing game. And then maybe against Weber State, they weren't trying to really use the running game. What does it look like when it all comes together? I'd like to see that on Friday. I'll be honest, but we don't know what that would look like.
You do have a couple of guys, and I feel like we've done a really good job covering on the individual position groups, but I do want to hone in a little bit on running back, because given what K-State has given up so far, the running game in the second half against Iowa State was abysmal. You've got the Army team that averaged 4.01 yards per carry against K-State's defensive front. The running game is where games can be won against K-State, and there's really no question about that. Quincy Craig is a guy that flashed some explosiveness against Hawaii, 125 yards on 7 carries. It's insane. And then Ishmael Mahdi added some big play. He had some explosive play juice against Weber State as well, Weber State. But Craig and Mahdi, those two guys, they provided sparks. What role do you expect the running backs to play on Friday night? Realistically, if you had to put money on it, what role do you think the running backs are going to play in against a defense that has given up a lot of explosives on running backs so far?
Yeah, so I think some of that is going to depend on, as Adam said, if Ricino is playing or not, because he's kind of a thumper and like the guy that's the between the tackles guy. Mahdi's the more kind of speed scat back a little bit, and then Quincy Craig is kind of the most well-rounded and had, he's flashed kind of surprising speed, but also probably is the best pass blocker among them. I think if they're all healthy, they're all going to see touches. If Ricino is out, I don't know if I have faith in Arizona's O-line to effectively establish a run game without at least a little bit of creativity, just because there's still some positions where there might be some, question marks against their first game against, I'm going to assume is an elevated talent level they're going against on the opposing D-line. One thing I don't think we've seen a lot of yet, but we heard a lot of through camp, was actually getting the running backs in the flats on short passes where it can kind of function as a run. I think you're going to see a lot more of that than we've seen in the first 2 games where we kind of had the vanilla offensive game plan. I would not be surprised to see a few more plays like that, a few more screens. especially with Mahdi and Quincy Craig.
Yeah, I think that's about right. We don't know what this Arizona running back room looks like if they're getting 25, 30 carries in a close game. They haven't really had to salt one away like that. That really mattered. So you're getting guys like Yarbrough, who's a true freshman, got some touches last week and looked okay in them. But you don't really want to take too much from that. If Rosano doesn't play, I get the impression that when the season goes along and the competition does get stiffer, Arizona's going to be a team that uses the pass to set up the run, because just the talent in the receiving room, like the receiver room, it's varied and it's vast. And you have a quarterback who can make good decisions, and the whole goal is to get the ball out of his hands quickly. So to the point of like getting running backs in the flat, just taking the easy pass, moving the ball, moving the chains. I could see Arizona being a team that uses the passing game to spread things out to open up the running game, especially if you don't have Rosano there to kind of be that thumper, or if the offensive line is struggling with, maybe some different like doubles, whatever defenses they're being presented with. Now, if Kansas State is a team that can't defend the run, like you guys are saying, should Arizona be able to take advantage of that? You'd hope so. But at the same time, is K-State can be the type of team that tries to load up on the run and say, okay, you have to beat us through the air. And if that's the case, I think Arizona won't be stubborn about it, trying to run the ball just because they're supposed to be able to. They'll just try to do whatever works. And I could see a lot of those short passes to the running backs, or even using receivers like little quick screens, hitches and stuff to try to be the extension of that running game just to stay on clock. But we just don't know what that looks like, especially if Rosano, like with the entire running back room in a competitive game, we don't know what that looks like yet.
And I think we've seen a little bit of it in the first two games of getting Noah Fifita out of the pocket and on the move, which can.
That's right. He runs a little bit too now. Yeah.
So there's been some designed runs. I would not be surprised to see a handful of those sprinkled in, and a lot of rollouts where if it's there, he has the ability. He's not Drew Bledsoe back there. We don't want him taking a lot of hits because he's not the world's largest gentleman. But I think a lot of that can kind of function in that way, where if there are opportunities and holes that'll open up in kind of creative ways, Daigie will find a way to exploit it.
And here's the deal, Adam, you mentioned, if K-State kind of stuffs the box and forces you to beat us through the air, other than Gunnar Maldonado just having the playbook from last year, which he doesn't because you've got a new offensive play caller, our secondary's missed a lot of assignments this year, so I'm not super confident that – if you try to beat us through the air, you probably can. I think you can beat us in both phases of the game at this point. Maybe that's just me being jaded through 3 games, but I digress. Matt, do you want to get into the defensive themes here for Arizona?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at Arizona's defense, they definitely look like a different unit this season, at least in the first couple games. They had 5 turnovers versus Hawaii. There was a pick 6 last week versus Weber State. In that Hawaii opener, 10 tackles for loss. They look more aggressive and fast and more opportunistic this season. What do you think has been the biggest difference in the defensive unit this season under Danny Gonzalez? And do you think this is a sustainable improvement once they start matching up against offenses from the Big 12?
Yeah. So one of the things that you guys talked about K-State was where there seems to be like a little bit of a lack of toughness and physicality. That has not been the case on the defensive side of the ball this year, which is a welcome change, I think, from past Arizona defenses. And I know this sounds a little odd, but I think that starts in the secondary, especially in the safety group, where that's where the most returning talent is. And Traden Stukes, probably the best, maybe one of the top 2 players on defense with Genesis Smith, who's also one of the safeties. Traden Stukes hasn't even played yet as he's coming back from injury. The secondary has been thumping guys, and they are scrambling to the ball. You can see they are. It's easier to execute, I think, against inferior opponents because Danny Gonzalez runs a lot of blitzes and twists and stunts to try to help create. Instead of gap assignments, they try to create the gaps for the tacklers to go make the play, which can be risky, as I think people have seen even from Danny Gonzalez defenses in the past. But when you have guys that are aggressive, and willing to be tough and physical, I think it makes a huge difference. And I think that's what we've seen with this defense. When, at the linebacker room, there's some new faces there, some guys we've barely even seen, like Riley Wilson, an FCS guy that has moved up, and we saw for the first time last week in limited action. Heard a lot of positive things about him, but haven't watched him play that much yet. The D line has, I think the front line starters are pretty good. There's a little concern on the depth there, but that's where you can scheme around that with the twists and stunts like that. If you have guys behind them that are ready, willing, and able to be aggressive and tough. And I think, it remains to be seen as the opponent talent level elevates, if that kind of approach can be sustainable. I mean, Arizona hasn't given up a touchdown yet, which even against opponent adjusted is still impressive, right? They've given up 3 field goals through 2 games. That's even against, as you guys may understand, even against an FCS school, that's a pretty good accomplishment. So it's another one of those things where I think the early returns are what you want to see. The mentality is there. I'm a little concerned. Well, not just a little concerned. I'm significantly concerned of, with that kind of scheme and that aggression, that Avery Johnson might be able to break off some long runs and just take advantage of guys that are overcommitting. I bluntly kind of half expect a few of those kind of plays. But, at the end of the day, I think this defense is trying to solve its problems with physicality and aggression, which is a welcome change.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I will caution that it's easy to be aggressive and physical when you're up by 30 and playing an inferior opponent, right? Yep. It's like these are college kids, defenses, they're very bandwagon. Like when things are going well, they're going to play physical, they're going to play aggressive, and it looks physical and aggressive and not just out of control because they're just simply more talented and better athletes than the ones across from them. Like you have seen from Arizona's defense what you wanted to see to feel good about them those first 2 games, absolutely. But there are some like Trey Smith, who's one of their better defensive linemen. He may not be playing this weekend. Someone like Chase Kennedy, who's changed positions. He's got a couple of sacks to start the season. Optimistic about him, but it's hard to say. The other thing I'll say, too, is like last year, the defense wasn't very good, but early in the season, especially until the injury started to hit, they put up a fight. Even that Kansas State game, I think it was like 14-7 at halftime or something, and the Arizona offense was doing nothing. Then it was like a punt return or something that led to a touchdown. Like the defense was playing pretty well. But then by about mid-season, you lost Traden Stukes. You lost Gunnar Maldonado. You lost Jacob Manu. You lost so many key guys where it's like, those are your captains. Those are your best players on defense. It's going to be hard to win a lot of games, and they just wore down over the course of the season, and the final numbers were just terrible. But right now, I'm saying like they're missing maybe Trey Smith, but they're mostly healthy. They have more depth than they did last season. Guys like Riley Wilson, some of those newcomers, some of those 61 newcomers, a lot of them actually were on the defensive side of the football. So it's like Danny Gonzalez, his style, and he's been a good defensive coordinator in his career, better defensive coordinator than head coach. We know that. So he seems to have the buy-in. He seems to have a team that believes in themselves. Now, granted, all it takes is one Avery Johnson 74-yard touchdown run to kind of shake that confidence, but a confident team, and they played with that the first couple of games. They fly around the football. They're physical. They're thumping. They're doing everything you want to see from them. But the question is, can they do that against a team that's going to put up a better fight, that they can't just bully by being bigger and faster than them? And I'm really interested to see that myself, because Kansas State, I mean, assuming Edwards plays, and I just think every Arizona fan assumes he will, just because that's just how it works for Arizona. If someone's hurt, they magically get better by the time they play Arizona. But he scares me. Avery Johnson really scares me. And I know it hasn't been the start of the season offensively that you guys wanted to see, but there's talent there, right? There's scary talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and to the point on Dylan Edwards, for the record, Kleiman said yesterday in his weekly press conference, he said Dylan's about 50-50. And he said
I don't believe that.
He said he didn't practice yesterday, which tells me a lot more than the injury report would indicate. I don't feel good about it. And that's an injury I've had in the past. Like trying to run on an ankle sprain is absolute. It's a nightmare to try to do that. So I'm not confident that he'll be out there. I wore my Dylan Edwards jersey last week in hopes that he would be hopefully returning or getting better. So maybe I'll not wear it this week and that'll reverse jinx it a little bit. But I do want to talk about the defensive line. Arizona's front has been disruptive, but like you've already mentioned, it's not been against good to great offensive lines. It's been against smaller, less tried and true competition. So to that point, they've been largely untested as far as the level of play that they've seen on the offensive line. That said, K-State's offensive line is completely out of sorts right now. They've protected well in passing sets for the most part. Avery hasn't been sacked a ton of times, and John Pastore's done great on that offensive line for K-State. But they've really struggled. This has been the worst rushing offense we've probably ever seen at K-State, at least in my memory. I mean, think about it. You got Daniel Thomas. You can go back a long ways since we had a really bad rushing offense, about as bad as this has been. Do you see Arizona's defensive line as a strength, especially given some of the deficiencies that we've seen from K-State's offensive line so far? Or do you think it's more of a prove it unit heading into this matchup?
I don't. The defense of the entire defense, I think the defensive line is probably the weakest point, and so much that there's players there, but there's fewer known quantities. Like, I mean, the strength is the secondary. There's guys that you're bringing back: Genesis Smith, Dalton Johnson, Traden Stukes, Marquise Groves, Killebrew. Some of the transfers: Javian Cole, Dansby, Aiden Garnes. Like, they got depth in the secondary, some talent in the secondary. I think that's their strength. Even their linebackers. You know, Chase Kennedy flashed quite a bit last season in his role. You have Tay Brown. You have guys that you looked in the season like, okay, that guy can play. Riley Wilson coming from Montana, like that guy can play. The defensive line was a lot of new guys and some players who had different roles than they had before. Like, they got Savea back from Texas. He spent a year there after being a good Wildcat for a couple years before. But just a lot of guys who I don't think we looked at and said those are playmakers. Those are going to guys who are going to get into the backfield consistently. They're going to be able to stuff the run. But there's bodies. And that doesn't mean they can't turn into those guys and become a consistent group. But I guess it's not to say, like, this is a group that can take advantage. Like, they're the weakest part of the defense is that group. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means there's a lot less known about that group. And maybe Brett has a different take on that. But when I say I like some of the players, I like Malachi Bailey. I like Trey Smith if he's healthy. You know, they got some guys on the front line. I'm like, okay, I want to see what they can do, but I need to see what they can do before I can feel truly confident they could take advantage of a maybe softer or more disorganized Kansas State line.
Yeah, I think it's more a matter of there's more of a question mark than it is a known strength or weakness at this point. You know, Tia Savea is a known quantity. Some of the FCS guys that came up, Deshaun McKnight, Bailey, as Adam mentioned, produced really well and have looked decently in camp, but, you know, they haven't played necessarily even that much in the first two games because they also haven't had to, right? Trey Smith got injured in the last game. He's probably the most consistent known quantity there. Guy that was, you know, always generating pressure and an unreasonably low percentage of sacks compared to pressures, which is a source of consternation, I think, among Arizona fans and probably especially the coaching staff. I think he had like 35 pressures and like 3 sacks last year or something like insanely low. You know, it's like I said, I think it's more of a question mark. And then you have some interesting guys that are, you know, Chase Kennedy, Adam mentioned, he's kind of played in the past as a defensive end-ish edge rusher type. Like, it's kind of like a 3-3-5 defensive scheme, but kind of like a, you know, a 4-2 really, but with like an undersized edge guy. So are those guys considered part of the defensive front on the line? Kinda. Right?
I put the hand in the dirt every now and then. Yeah.
And Arizona has a handful of guys like Chase Kennedy that are, you know, if they were, you know, 30, 40 pounds heavier and a couple inches taller, they'd be considered NFL edge rushers, right? And so they're kind of tweeners that you can be effective with in the right scheme. And I think that's where you want to see the Deshaun McKnights and Tia Savea just kind of be, you know, take up some space in the middle and do their twists and stunts. And I think they're athletic enough that they can do that. I don't know if they're, I'll put it this way. I'm not necessarily concerned the defensive line is going to get overpowered. I have more concern that they can scheme their way to big holes that they can't make up for with raw ability that can get exposed, right? So I think realistically, this game is one of the ones we've been circling for a while because we're going to find out a lot more about a lot of the guys, and the defensive line is probably at the top of that list.
I want to talk a little bit about the linebackers. A couple names for K-State fans that we probably will be hearing on Friday. Max Harris, Tay Brown. These are guys that are really just, you know, doing a great job at that position, flying around, just, you know, making plays. I mean, that's a big thing. And especially with the defense that looks like is emphasizing some speed, pursuit, and toughness. seems like these two guys and the linebacker core in general are kind of embodying the defensive energy that we're seeing. So, like out of the linebacker unit, who do you think is kind of the main leader of that group, and what have they done to really help set the tone of the defense this season?
Yeah, it's interesting because Jacob Manu, who was that guy the
Yeah.
previous couple of seasons, left for Washington. He got hurt last year against Colorado and then transferred to Washington. So it's like, who's going to take over that role? Tate Brown was excellent for Arizona last season. He was consistent, showed great promise. Like, he wasn't amazing, but he was a good player in a bad defense, or what became a bad defense. Like, okay, what can he do with more talent around him? He's there. He's leading tackler right now. He's playing. He's taken that step forward, or at least every bit as good as he was last year, but probably a little bit better in this defensive system. I mentioned Max Harris. He's been getting some. I think Riley Wilson's going to get more action too this weekend. He's a guy who Brent mentioned earlier was a lot of the talk in camp about coming from Montana. He was super productive, just a really good football player. Then was hurt to start the season. Got on the field last week. I would expect to see him more this week too. But I think what you're going to see is a rotating linebacker core. Tate Brown's going to be the main. It depends on how competitive the game is. True, like that's if Arizona's up by 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, some of these guys will probably not see the field any longer. But I think you're going to see Kennedy. You're going to see Riley Wilson. You're going to see Max Harris. You're going to see a lot of Tate Brown. You're going to see just this group of players that have been rotating in. And I think that's what Arizona wants to do. Their whole idea is to keep fresh bodies out there, where maybe what these guys lack in overall talent and ability is made up for by being fresh and having, bouncy legs late in a game where maybe the offense doesn't have that necessarily because they've been playing for 60 minutes or 45 minutes up to that point. So, which guys are going to be the big playmakers? I mean, Tate Brown's going to be a guy, but Riley Wilson, Max Harris, I would look for a lot from those guys. And in passing situations, especially, I wouldn't be shocked if Chase Kennedy gets in the backfield a handful of times from a linebacker spot, or maybe if he's a down lineman on a third down or something. But those are the guys that have been the most likely playmakers. But this group as a whole, they're going to rotate through guys.
Yeah, I think Tate Brown is the clear leader, but almost by default there, because Riley Wilson and Max Harris are new guys, right? And Tate Brown was a guy that was not super highly recruited out of the Phoenix area, but has turned himself into a kind of solid player. I feel like the whole linebacking core kind of embodies the notion of trying to be better than the sum of your parts kind of thing, where there's not freak athletes there. All of them, if an SEC or a Big Ten school wanted to expose one of those guys individually, they would be able to. But within a scheme with physical toughness, with knowing your assignments, I don't think there's going to be a lot of mistakes from that group. And I think that they'll be pretty effective. And I think it starts with Tate Brown, he's just consistent, right? Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said for that, rather than just, flashing insane potential. That's probably where you see more. And I think to Adam's point, I think Riley Wilson is the guy that we're all on the Arizona side kind of intrigued to see if they really kind of unleash him, because he was such a talk of camp and he produced so well at the FCS level.
I want to talk about the secondary, because I really like the quote that one of you had of the toughness starts in the secondary. And this seems like a really fun group, despite Gunnar Maldonado being a turncoat and making his way over to the Purple Wildcats in the scratching post rivalry here. But
it's his third Wildcat, by the way. He was in Northwestern to Arizona to Kansas State, so he's a Wildcat for life.
He's a Wildcat for life.
He's going to Weber State next season. If he
Wildcat country, let's ride.
And then Kentucky, and then how many different Wildcats can he do, and how many years of college eligibility?
If only we had a Wildcats in the NFL, that'd be perfect fit for him. This secondary is forcing turnovers. You've had 5 total interceptions, despite 2 of those coming from linebackers and defensive linemen. Ironically enough, 3 of those have been within the secondary so far. You've got a ton of pass breakups already within the secondary as well. Javion Cole was one of those guys that had a pick 6. K-State's wide receivers, this is an interesting group, because this is a group that has really exceeded a lot of the expectations that we've had for that group specifically. But the issue is, one of the best members of that group that has exceeded his expectations is Jaron Bradley, JB Bradley, who you may know from his time at Texas Tech. He's now hurt and he's going to be out for a few weeks. So outside of that, there have been some inconsistencies. A guy like Jerron Tibbs has had some great flashes, but he's also dropped the ball at critical moments of different games. So it's interesting, because when you say that group is tough, and I look at this wide receiver group, it's funny when we go position group by position group, because it seems like your defensive line might be kind of week on week. The linebackers, I don't know. We'll see with that. It sounds like the linebacking group is pretty salty as well. But then you look at the secondary, that might be like stronger on stronger, depending on how we look at it. But you've got a tough wide receiver group and a tough secondary. So how confident are you in Arizona's DBs holding up against a quarterback like Avery Johnson and the wide receivers in the K-State wide receiving core, as well as the tight ends that they work into that? How confident do you feel in this Arizona secondary?
I mean, I think it's probably collectively the best position group on the team. And we felt certainly in the safety group, I think that has been known for a while. The thing that's actually been a pleasant surprise so far, you mentioned Javion Cole. He's a guy that was with Brennan at San Jose State and got highly recruited last year to Texas, didn't play, and now is at Arizona. He's actually hasn't started yet. And he was a fairly highly touted guy. And I don't know if it's necessarily anything he has done to not earn that position as much as other guys have just done a little bit more that are maybe a bit of a surprise. One of the guys I don't even think we've seen him at all yet this season. Keep me honest here, Adam. Marquise Groves Killebrew was going to be one of the starters. He's been kind of out dinged up. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's coming back. He's looked decent last year. Michael Dansby, I believe also from San Jose State, has actually looked pretty darn good and maybe like the best all-around corner. And so you start adding all these things up with Javion Cole, and I'm probably forgetting a corner or two. And Adam, keep me honest
Garnes.
there. But, Garnes is another guy, another transfer in that's like it's a plethora of riches in terms of being able to rotate guys in that are. I don't know if any of the corners are stars, but you're probably
Gavin
running.
Hunter.
He's a safety. He's filling in for Traden Stukes. Traden Stukes is a corner playing kind of what we used to call the star position. I don't know what they call it anymore. That kind of nickel, and Gavin Hunter's been filling in for him, and is one of the guys that at least got one of those interceptions. But the real star on the defense is Genesis Smith. He's a guy that was, not a 4 or 5 star. He's kind of a high 3-star coming out of Chandler area in Phoenix, but people were pretty early on being like, this guy might be legit, and he is. I mean, I think it's Danny Gonzalez had a quote basically saying he's probably not going to be here next year, kind of thing. For a guy that is
he's
not
a Sunday player. Yeah.
This is kind of, I think, going to be. He's been a little bit in the shadow of like Traden Stukes has been a really great player, like last year before he got hurt and the year before. He's one of those guys that kind of sets the tone. He's both athletic, he's tough, he's a thumper, he's obliterated a few receivers. He's got good size and athleticism. All that to say, I feel pretty darn good about the secondary overall, and especially in the safety group.
Yeah, Genesis Smith was a guy that I think a lot of Arizona fans were worried about transferring after last season, because he's a player who could have gone most anywhere if he wanted to. He's an NFL type of talent. Dalton Johnson is another guy who did not play in the game against Kansas State last season. One of those safeties. He's kind of like a linebacker safety type. He's not necessarily the coverage guy, but he is a safety. Great experience. And with him and Genesis Smith, you feel really comfortable about Arizona's safeties. And then Brett went through the guys in the secondary, the rest of them. It's a deep group. It may not have a true number. Like Takario Davis last season was like a number 1 type of corner. I saw he got an interception for Washington. The guy had stone hands at Arizona, but apparently learned to catch at Washington now. So good for him. But like, he's the type of guy who looks like, okay, that's an NFL type of player. Before Ephesians Price sock a couple years ago, like, oh, that's an NFL build. Sure. They may not have that guy on the roster right now. They have a lot of corners who it seems like they battle and they can put up a fight. And if Arizona's defensive front can get some pressure or make life a little bit more uncomfortable for Avery Johnson in that passing game, then they can make some plays. But really, like any secondary, I think we all know, if you don't get pressure on the quarterback, your secondary is not going to hold up. Doesn't matter how good you are, right? So it kind of comes back to the previous question. Like, yes, Arizona's secondary is the least of our concerns, but they're not a shutdown secondary, Legion of Boom type of situation where it's like they can just hold their own on an island for 6-7 seconds at a time. No, they're going to need a little bit of pressure, some creative game planning from Danny Gonzalez to make Avery Johnson's life uncomfortable. And I know Dalton Johnson in the press conference, I think this is Tuesday recording, he said that their goal is to make him a passer. They're talking about his running, like want to shut down the run, make him pass. And I mean, when you do that, if that means kind of stacking the box, doing some contain, making sure that he's staying in the pocket to throw the ball down the field, that's going to open up some guys with some single coverage and things like that. So can they hold up in that situation? We'll see. But it's hard to imagine the cornerbacks and the secondary as a whole just getting beat badly on plays, just, falling down, jumping routes they shouldn't be jumping. Like, can they get beat? Yes, every secondary can, but it's going to be more likely because they just had to cover on an island for too long of a time against a quarterback who can buy time and make plays, especially off schedule.
So I'm just curious from the Arizona perspective. I mean, is there anything that your fan base is wanting to know about, the Kansas State team of 2025? Is there anything, that you think your fan base is, just wanting to get an idea, of what this team that we've unfortunately been watching the past 3 weeks is like?
Yeah, I think Arizona fans have a pretty good sense of what they're going to be facing in Avery Johnson, and that's probably just the source of consternation because he is an electric enough player that he's always a threat on almost any play. So to your question, Matt, I think, from an outsider's perspective, I'd love to kind of know what your guys' perceptions are of outside of Avery Johnson. What is the position group or position groups that you think are the biggest strengths, and what do you think are the biggest liabilities?
Yeah. I can start with the strengths. I think on the offensive side, I look at a kind of a comparison sometimes with 2024 to 2025. And, you mentioned Avery. I think Avery has done a really good job of improving in 2025. He looks like a dynamic passer. He's really made some exceptional plays for the most part through this year. A position group I think that we can say is a strength, despite some drops on the offensive side, is I think our wide receiver and tight end room. They really did a focus this year of trying to improve that room, bringing in some transfers. They, almost had to re-recruit Jace Brown to come back, who has looked really good, I would say, in the first 3 games of the season. But Jerron Tibbs has had some really good moments. He's a Purdue transfer that has gotten some high praise from Avery Johnson through the offseason. Unfortunately, JB Bradley got hurt in the Army game. He's going to be out for a handful of weeks. Got hurt on a what probably should have been a touchdown. He made a great play, and based off of a rule, they had to bring the ball back. But I will mention and something that I think I'll be interested to see, I'm sure Bob is, in our fan base, with JB Bradley out. He was a guy who had some speed. He had some size. He really had those pieces. We do have a 5-star freshman in Lincoln Cure who's been out the past few games. He has not played a collegiate snap yet. That fits the mold of a guy that maybe will get maybe a few plays against Arizona if he's healthy enough because of that size and speed. He was a Kansas champion track athlete. He's going to be a really good player for us. So I think he's a tight end, but I think he's going to play some wide receiver as he builds as a freshman. So I think from a strength perspective on the offensive side, I look at the wide receivers. I'll quickly go through the defensive side. I think the strength, which I think is hard because I look at certain defensive aspects and they haven't been very good from a defensive perspective. The Army game really tired this group out, especially with the time of possession. I look at our defensive line. The first couple games I thought was pretty solid. They made some good plays. We have some good rushers to the quarterback. Toby Osunsanmi is a guy that, didn't get a lot of play for the Army game because of the way Army plays, with the triple option. But he's a guy who has a sack, at least one sack in the first 2 games, a speed rusher. He's a very quick defensive end that I think is going to do his best to try and get past and give Noah Fifita a little bit of trouble. So I look at the defensive line because admittingly from a linebacker perspective, other than Austin Romaine, that group's been a little, tough. And then the secondary has been very tough as well. From a communication perspective, this group is not meshed yet. Is Friday the opportunity to mesh against a guy who has shown some really good flashes throwing the ball? I don't know. but we have some young talent back there, guys who got some playing time last year. They've mixed it with some transfers. You mentioned Gunnar Maldonado, who admittingly was like my preseason defensive MVP. I thought he was going to be really huge for us, just from a leadership perspective. I had heard some really good things, from his time in the Arizona program, that I thought he'd be a good leader. He's still trying to get things together. So the defense admittingly has been a big struggle, I think, these past 2 games. And, it's something that, we're waiting to see. But Bob, you want to go into the maybe the weaknesses?
Yeah, I think from a weakness standpoint, some of the depth at wide receiver it's more unproven. Once you get beyond that 3-headed monster of Jace Brown, JB Bradley, and Jerron Tibbs, with Bradley being out, we saw it in the last game. They're throwing in Jamiri Davis. They're throwing in Adonis Moise. We're seeing some guys out there that haven't had much, if any, playing time. So it's fascinating to see that. It's going to be interesting to see, do they work in a guy like Sterling Lockett more into the passing game with some of the lack of depth there. So that's been a tough spot. The tight ends have also been, this is a room that over the last 4 or 5 years has been a really strong room for K-State in the Kleiman regime. And this year, for whatever reason, there's been some turnover on the offensive coaching staff. You have Matt Wells coming in to be the primary play caller, offensive coordinator, with Connor Riley exiting the program for the Dallas Cowboys to be their offensive line coach. And they looked pretty good in their first game. I'll admit that. But you've got Brian LePack moving away from the tight ends room to the offensive line, and we're seeing both the offensive line and tight end rooms kind of looking out of sorts for this team. So I think the shifts on the coaching staff, I don't know how much of it is just trying to get their bearings and how much of it is cohesion with the talent that you have on the field, how much of it is losing a guy like George Fitzpatrick, who was a really highly touted recruit coming through the transfer portal from Ohio State coming into this season. He was supposed to be slated as a starter on the offensive line and is not starting because he had a medical issue that came up this summer that's kept him sidelined. And so he's trying to get his weight back up so he can get back out on the gridiron. But it's those are 2 rooms that have been kind of, wide receivers have exceeded expectations, but I worry about the depth. Tight ends have been kind of out of sorts. There've been a lot of drops. There's been not a lot of great blocking. It's been lackluster compared to what we've seen and what the baseline of that group has been in the past. And then offensive line is a huge weakness on offense right now. And then I'm just going to keep going. The running backs, we had a lot of praise for Joe Jackson coming into this season because we thought he could be more of a DJ Giddens archetype with how he runs the ball and being more of with Dylan Edwards being more of a scat back. And I don't know that we necessarily want to run him through the tackles all the time. Joe Jackson was going to be more of your every down back. And the offensive line play has been so abysmal that Joe hasn't really had much of an opportunity to get going. And then there have been moments where, he's turned it over in critical situations in the game. And that's been kind of a damper on his performance this season too. I mean, he leads the team in rushing, but you look at a K-State team with 136 rushing yards through 3 games, you're thinking something's going on there. On defense, it's the secondary for sure. I don't want to necessarily call out some individual players, but that's a group that, Gunnar Maldonado aside, because Matt mentioned all the intangibles, all the leadership components, that's a group that seems to lack toughness. That's a group that seems to be missing a lot of assignments and maybe isn't studying up on the playbook or studying up on film for the opponent week in and week out. And again, how much of that is the weirdness of the first 3 weeks of the schedule? I don't know, but that's a group I want to see more toughness. If you want to talk strengths, Austin Romaine is that. He leads the team in tackles. He was a PFF All-American preseason. They absolutely love the guy. And even there's more I want to see out of him as well within that linebacking core. And then the D-line it's an interesting group because I do feel like they gave up a lot of rushing yards against Army, but we do have some elite pass rushers on the edge with Tobio, like Matt mentioned. And Ryan Davis is a guy that is getting healthier and may see the field this weekend or in weeks to come. And that's another name to watch for is Ryan Davis on the edge. So it's a mixed bag at the moment and obviously jaded, but here we are.
I wonder because you mentioned some of the transfers that Kansas State got and brought in, and some of the guys that they don't have from last season. But should there been any reason to expect a step back? Like Arizona, in hindsight, we can say last season, oh, yeah, that makes sense. They lost too much talent. The coaching staff just, the way Brent Brennan had to throw it together to probably not get his first choice of coordinators, and they had what they had, especially with the injuries. Was there any reason going into it? I mean, I know we're only a few games into the season for Kansas State, but you could, by the end of the season, they'll probably say, okay, yeah, it makes sense that they struggled this year because this happened. Or is this a situation where it's like the pieces are all there? There's no reason why they should be struggling. Because that's what, like I was saying earlier, what scares me as an Arizona fan is I say a team that there's still good players here, good recruits, good transfers, good quarterback. They lost their offensive coordinator, but doesn't mean they have to change everything so dramatically. So like they shouldn't be a bad football team. Is there something that when you look back, when we're done in this season, everybody's like, yep, that makes sense why they only won 4 games or 5 games this season?
I would say no. I think expectations were extremely high across the entire fan base, just based off of how 2024 went. This is a team that really went on a slide in November. I mean, they were 1-3 in the month of November, but the bowl game kind of showed a little bit of the glimpses of the future. Some guys that we figured were going to get some playing time. And you think about the offseason and the development of those players and the transfers that were brought in. The fact that we're 1-2 right now is extremely surprising. You have to wonder, what is going on internally, with how these guys are prepping and focusing for, these teams that are upcoming. What is the coaching staff doing? Because in the grand scheme of things, this, as Bob said, this is a team that is showing a lack of toughness from an outsider's perspective. And that is something that is very concerning, because I think a majority of our fan base would probably agree that the talent is there. But it's sometimes the fundamentals. It's just sometimes what we're looking at on the field. It does not look like a group that's cohesive. It does not look like a group that wants the win more than the other team. And it's extremely surprising. I mean, we have been very lucky, from recent history perspective, having teams that have shown toughness and resiliency in situations. And, we've been very, fortunate to have some really great teams. So it's a frustration, as a fan, as an outsider, because I believe, just based off the expectations, we really felt, that this was a team that could do something. I'm not saying they're out of it by any means. And I'm one of the more pessimistic people. This Friday is a huge test for this group, because of just from a road game perspective. And yes, it's not a Big 12 game, but it's a Big 12 team. Like you're going to be playing teams like this, through the rest of the season. So it will be very interesting to see how they bounce back after the Army game, which I think, yes, this team felt that they should have won, based off of, certain situations. But in reality, Army played an incredible game. And their game plan against us was really good in keeping Avery Johnson off the field. That's, I think, a key for opposing teams is keeping Avery Johnson off the field.
It's just that easy, right?
Yeah, super easy.
Arizona puts the triple option into the offense, and then they'll be good to go.
Yeah, this was unexpected, certainly. I think everybody had K-State chalked up because of the returning production, because of the amount of talent on this team, that this was going to be not just a team that could compete for, 8, 9, 10 wins, but make it to Arlington and win in the Big 12 championship. And when you go back and look at the last 8 games that K-State's played, you've gone 3-5 in those games, and some of which, yeah, at the time we were looking at it, okay, you lose to Iowa State and Arizona State. Those are two teams that played in the Big 12 championship. You drop a game to Houston. That was kind of inexplicable at the time. We thought that was the Kleiman clunker, because he always has a clunker every year. But because of the track record of history of the last, 8 years, 7 years that he's been with this program, we didn't have any reason to think that was a leading indicator. So much as an anomaly. And at this point, when you look on it, in hindsight's 2020, it feels more like a leading indicator of, whoa, something might be really wrong here with the coaching staff. Something might be really wrong here with how they're coaching the talent on the team. And we don't really know what it is. We're not insiders. We're not in the locker room, so I don't want to speculate. But yeah, things have really been weird ever since Kleiman was kind of away from the team prior to that Houston game, because he was away from the team for a few days, and things really haven't seemed to get back on track to that point. So yeah,
that's interesting.
Really, frankly, weird.
Yeah, because it's like things that you can't put a finger on, right? Like you can't point and say that's the reason why things are not going well. Like, do you see them coming out this week? Like, are there teams to say, you know what, our season's on the line, and it's not quite yet, right? I mean, they lose to Arizona, they're probably not going to be a highly ranked team. They could still win the Big 12, but is this a team that has that back against the wall, us versus the world mentality that's going to come out fired up, playing sharp and ready to win a game, or is it going to be a team you think that's just like, yeah, you know, whatever? It comes to Tucson, it's a little hot maybe. They play a team that's fired up at home and they just kind of roll over. Like, what type of makeup do you think this team has?
Are we doing score predictions? Let's do.
I mean, we can get there if you want. Like I was,
yeah,
because I think Arizona fans see Kansas State losing to Army and say, "Oh no, they're going to come out fired up. They're not going to look past Arizona at all now, right? Like this is a team that's going to be like, oh, we can't lose this game. We're going to give it our best effort." But then it sounds like you guys think like, yeah, their team's going to be like, yeah, whatever, you know. So they lost to Army. Who cares? Like they're not going to be that type of dude. So I'm curious, like, because they're college kids, right? They could go either way. Where if the goals that they had in front of them are no longer attainable, at least they don't think they are achievable anymore. Maybe they do kind of quit on the season a little bit, or conversely, they say, you know what, Big 12 is still ours for the taking. If we just right the ship, we have the talent. Let's go out there, win one on the road, and get this thing going.
The thing that makes me worry is the team and the coaching staff have kind of lost the locker room, so to speak, with the fan base. So does the team see that as chip on the shoulder mentality, or do they see that as, oh, we're going to pack it in? Because I don't know. That Army game, they had a blowout attendance at Bill Snyder Family Stadium for that game. It might have I don't think it broke a record for attendance, but it was one of the most heavily attended non-conference games against a G5 opponent maybe ever. So you see a lot of fans who are going to be disappointed. The team, the body language that you see on the sideline with some of these guys, it's just not quite what we've seen in the past, especially from Kleiman teams and Snyder teams. Those are guys that, you know, had toughness and were known for it. It's walk on you to a degree. You think about Jordy Nelson back in the day, you know, think about a guy like Reggie Stubblefield who came in from FCS and an HBCU and came in and dominated in the Big 12 in that Big 12 championship season. So I'm more of the mindset that I think this team just doesn't have it. And I think K-State's going to get beat. And I think the only situation where K-State can win this game is if you end up in kind of a shootout, and if Avery and the offense can continue to execute as they have for the most part this season. If you give Avery the ball, you give him opportunities, he's going to do more with that than he will, you know, do anything negative with that. So I think if we end out in a shootout situation, if the score's in the 40s, I think K-State could pull it out. But if the score is in the 20s or 30s, my score prediction is I've got Arizona winning 33-21. So I just don't see it. I don't see it from our defense. It sounds like your defense has some tough guys in the secondary, which really concerns me because one of our few bright spots has been the wide receiver core. And if the receivers aren't able to get open and you've got a really good secondary, that really makes me worried about this game because the rushing game ain't it. The rushing game ain't there.
Yeah, I mean, he said a majority of my thoughts as well. I think the key thing is the defense. It's just a lot of fundamental mistakes that I think are very tough to try and remedy, especially on a short week. So my final score prediction is 34-28 to Arizona. I think we will score some points. K-State will. But I'm still worried about that defense. I just, you know, especially in a road environment, it's going to be a tough environment, I think, to try and remedy a lot of those issues. So I think Arizona is going to get this one at home.
See, the thing that I've been thinking about, the extra layer of nuance here is it being a Friday night game. I much prefer to be the home team on a Friday night game than the road team. But, you know, then little bit of my Adam Green Eeyore vibe as an Arizona fan goes, well, if they just had a really poor showing at home, maybe it's the sooner you can get out of your house and get to a new environment and band together on the road in a quick turnaround might be beneficial. Bob, to your point, I think that, when you guys are talking about the secondary where they're seeing a lot of confusion, I can see a lot of Seth Dagey offense creating confusions and potentially some quick scores like we saw last week against Weber State, which cuts both ways because that means Avery Johnson's got the ball in his hands a lot faster. So
I'd give him the ball back gladly after scoring 7 points, though. That's a trade-off I'll take.
Well, hot take, Adam.
Yeah,
You'll take long touchdown.
I'm just saying, I don't mind if he's on the field with Arizona in the lead. That's cool.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to lead to more opportunities for Avery Johnson to do Avery Johnson things, which I think we'll see how that plays out. I think Arizona's home crowd, it's a Friday night, kind of early for Arizona, so we'll see how they show up.
8:30.
Well, yeah, Arizona has the whole thing about being 110 degrees and what ESPN and Fox want to have time zones tends to make late games here. I think it's going to be shootout-ish is my best guess because I think Avery Johnson is going to get some plays. I think Arizona is going to get some long touchdown passes. I think the real key is what you guys talked about earlier is how is Arizona going to be able to kind of have an effective run game to not just score too fast and eat up some clock. I'm going to go 34-31 Arizona.
And Brett had a lot of the same things. I'm going to be that guy apparently. You guys, I was thinking Kansas State was going to win this game the whole time. I really was. It just strikes me as Arizona, I think, is going to play well. I think Arizona is going to play hard and is going to be fired up. But I could just see Kansas State being still just more talented, has more high-end talent in this game with their backs against the wall. I think the short week going on the road could help galvanize them a little bit. And, of course, they have a dynamic quarterback who Arizona last season, they really struggled against most quarterbacks, but especially the mobile ones. And you guys remember that, I'm sure, very vividly, Avery Johnson running up and down the field against Arizona. The number that I had in my head was 31-27 Kansas State. And I hate being that guy. I mean, someone has to do it, right? It's but it's just, I think Arizona's going to play well. Or at least one of us say, you know what? Okay, tough loss, but the season's still going to be okay. But there's a reason why people thought Kansas State was going to be a good team this season. There's a reason they were a top 25 team to start the year. And those reasons still exist. And until Arizona proves to me they can beat someone like a Big 12 type opponent, I'm going to have a hard time picking them to do that unless they're playing Houston because they beat the crap out of them last year, even though I know they're probably better this season. But that's kind of where I am. And maybe that's just a jaded – I'm an optimistic Arizona fan, but I just don't see them – I can't predict them to beat a good team, a talented team, until I see them beat a good and talented team. And despite all your guys' pessimism, which seems warranted, there's still talent on that roster. And I think it's going to be fired up in this game. It's going to be a good football game. I think it's going to be a competitive game. But, yeah, I think Kansas State pulls it out.
I hope you're right. I don't think you're right, but I hope you're right. Well, Adam and Brett, thank you guys both again for coming on today and helping us preview the game this weekend for both our fans and for your fans. Let our fans know where they can find you, and we'll give you the final word to plug whatever you've got going on over there at Wildcat Radio 2.0.
Yeah, I usually do this for our show, but I'll let Brett do it for your show.
Oh, geez. I was going to say, thank God Adam has to do this. Adam's the old radio guy. He actually
fine. I'll do it. You can find us on the Twitter machine at Wildcat Radio AZ. We're on Spotify, we're on iTunes, and we're on our Twitter account when Brett decides to send the link. Yeah, that's it.
I tend to have a drink or two and a live tweet from the handle during the game and have some fun if people want to interact with it too.
Hey, I'm right there with you.
Wildcat Radio AZ. That's the handle.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming on again. That's going to do it for us today. Once again, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Anti-Maze Parlor. Visit them at antimaze.com or follow them on social media at Anti-Maze for a full list of their upcoming events. And if you're stopping by, be sure to tell them Cocaine Willie sent you. We also have our Wildcat Country Let's Ride koozies for sale at Anti-Maze. So stop by, buy a koozie. We would love to have you rocking those koozies out in the wild. Tweet us or Instagram us if you have a koozie and are sporting it out in the wild, although it may be embarrassing to do so right now with how K-State has been playing. But finally, we are also the K-State representative on the College Huddle. Wildcat Radio 2.0 is the Arizona affiliate of the College Huddle, but the College Huddle is the largest community of fan-driven content in the nation. Check them out at thecollegehuddle.com and follow them on social media at College Huddle. Last but not least, you can follow our show at Cocaine Willie on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. I think that's it. Or follow us individually. I'm at Bob Trollsby. Chef is at Chef Andre Napier. And Fireball Matt is at Matt Marchesini. Matt.
Oh, it's my turn. I actually get to do this. Cocaine's a hell of a drug, baby.
We are all coke and no joke. Wildcat country.
Let's ride. Let's ride.
Both Wildcats.
Go Cats.
Go Cats.